that up. All right. All right, chat, here we are. For those who are not used to this particular podcast, I'm going to let you know that you may hear things you do not like, and if you don't like them, then really just tough shit. Let's see here. So, chat, give me a check on my volume, and then Pundit, can you give me a few words?
Hello, everyone. This is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords.
All right, so chat, let me know how he sounds, let me know how I sound, and we'll go ahead and get this show on its cringy road. Get some music too, actually. I always got to do the music manually, and I need to figure out a way to get that where it's not manual. Let's see here. Because unfortunately, it's hard to balance the audio when you can't actually fucking hear it. There we go. Vapor Waves, chill version. There we go. All right, and balance the audio. Come on, quit going mute. Listen here, thing. Very professional time. All right, zoo. There we go. All right, so Mr. Pundit, I think a lot of folks here know who you are, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the folks who is your daddy and what do you do?
Okay. Well, I'm the RPG Pundit, and if you know about me, it's probably through the medium of tabletop role-playing games. I've been a prominent blogger on the state of the hobby since about 2004, 2005, and went on to participate in making games for the OSR, the old school Renaissance, and as a result of my blogging, my reviews, and my design work, I was picked by Mike Merles to be one of the main consultants on the design of 5th edition D&D.
Really?
Yeah, and after that, I was the subject. Immediately after that, I was the subject of one of the first kind of major and concentrated cancel movements, what was called Consultant Gate, which happened about 6 months before Gamergate, where myself and one of the other consultants on the project was were targeted by kind of the woke crowd for supposed thought crimes, you know.
So real quick, while we're hitting that subject, what caused this hullabaloo with you? Like, was it something you said? Did you like sneeze on a pride flag? Like, what happened exactly?
No, look, it's a bit of a long story, right? But I mean, I've been kind of a critic of this kind of pretentious sort of story game type tabletop games since, you know, the early 2000s, as I mentioned. And the thing is that the people that were behind that kind of movement, the story games movement, people that said, well, you know, D&D is stupid and infantile and it's incoherent, and what people really want to play is games about, you know, teenage girls smoking in the back alley of the fast food store where they work, you know, or something like that. That's a real game, by the way. So these people, I would mock them ruthlessly, and I have for years, and I kind of was part of the reason why the story games movement kind of collapsed. And I noticed by the early part of the last decade, around 2012, 13, 14, that some of the people, almost all of them, the same people that had been part of the story games movement, were now starting a whole other dialogue, right? They had wanted to control gaming by claiming that they were producing the superior game design, which was garbage, but they failed because nobody wanted to play their games, right? So now all of a sudden, all of them were starting to talk about political issues in RPGs, right, in the hobby, right, and doing that in a way where they were claiming that the hobby was toxic. That was, you know, the hobby is toxic was pretty much a slogan of theirs, and claiming that it was sexist, racist, homophobic, etc. And I would debate that with them. That in itself isn't the problem. The problem was that they quickly switched from that to trying to push for the censorship of games and game designers that they didn't approve of, and that were basically people that were critical of them. So that's why I was such a big target. They were, when they found out that I had credit in the fifth edition book.
You had wrong think.
That was horrifying, especially because fourth edition of D&D, which was a huge commercial failure for Wizards of the Coast, it was designed along the principles of the story game movement, and it failed, right? And then when it had failed, because at the time that fourth edition came out, I predicted on my blog that they were going to lose 2/3 of their customer base because of the what they'd chosen to do with fourth edition. Mm-hmm. And then I was told when fifth edition was announced that it was coming, I was told that I had actually been completely right in my prediction. And so that's one of the reasons why they wanted me to be the consultant now and see if my suggestions of how to make a successful game would be better than theirs were. And of course, we know they were, because fifth edition, in spite of the wokeness and whatever else, mechanically was set up and ended up being the most successful edition Wizards ever did of Dungeons and Dragons. So they were very mad about this, and so that was part of why they wanted to try to cancel me.
So basically,
and of course, their argument was basic, because I realized I didn't fully answer your question there. Their argument was basically that they would make claims that I was a bigot or sexist or racist or homophobic,
course,
right?
Yes,
it's a lot of evidence to the contrary that anyone could see from my writing in my blogs, or and more recently my YouTube videos. But their fundamental argument, when they were pressed on it, of like, well, what's your proof of that, is the RPG Pundit was mean to me on the internet. And of course I am mean to idiots on the internet, right? I don't care. I'm an equal opportunity asshole, right? I'm going to be mean to you regardless of your race, gender, or sexual orientation. So this was they were trying to do that projection of, well, he's attacking me because I'm a woman, right? No, I'm not attacking you because you're a woman. I'm attacking you because you're an idiot who claims that Dungeons and Dragons is filled with rapists and things like that, and that the hobby has to be controlled by people like you in order to make it acceptable.
That's the usual shield I see a lot of folks use to deflect things. Like me, like I have like this whole chat section here. I finally found the section where maybe he called me alt-right off the bat just because I didn't like fucking safety tools. And it seems like, it's this obvious shield they pull out to try and batter you with, because it somehow makes them immune to like clapback or even, simple discussion. And I think you kind of led us into where I wanted to go with this, and it's how, do you believe that entertainment in its own subsect D&D has been weaponized in a way?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely it has. I mean, the just like with every other part of popular culture, the word total isn't in totalitarian by accident, right? The idea that they have is that the way that they're going to get their way, and this is actually very interesting that the old school communists would have famously a method that they had for taking over, for example, like trade unions, right? So trade unions would get together, vote on who was going to be the union boss or something like that, right? And the thing was, of course, first they'd bring a bunch of communists into the union, and then those communists would make sure that they would be at all of them would be at all those meetings, right? And most of these other guys, whatever, let's say metal workers or something, they don't have time for this shit. They don't want to, they don't want to be there for very long. They're not interested in playing a big part of that. And so, a lot of them wouldn't show up. So suddenly, even if the communists were only like 10% of the union, they'd be close to 50% of the people at the meetings, right? And then they would bring up points of order, debate. They would stretch it out. They would try to like just push and push and push and push at these meetings until people went away, right? People gave up, and then they'd call for a vote, and all of a sudden they had the majority and they got their way, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the postmodern Marxists do exactly the same thing, but on a much bigger scale, which is that they They have a narrative that they design, and then they're going to put that narrative into every aspect of every moment of your life. And your free time is one of the most important places to do that, right? Because obviously school and work are very important, but it's also very important that you have no escape from that, right? That you have to constantly be barraged with this ideology. And so one of their goals is to convert anything that people do for fun, whether it's watching football or playing Dungeons and Dragons or video games or comic books or Marvel movies or whatever, any of those things, even like knitting, right? Whatever you're doing,
crochet.
There's political aspects to that. And so you do not have a way to get away from it. And they're going to punish you inside those pastimes of yours if you don't bend the knee to what they're demanding, if you don't acknowledge what it is that they're calling for. And always the basis, the argument for this is that this pastime is somehow toxic or problematic, and only we can fix it. And if you don't want to let us fix it, if you don't let us take control, that means that you're one of the evil people that makes this toxic, and we have to kick you out of this thing that you do, right?
Well, it seems like they're trying to reverse a gatekeep. It always caught me as really kind of unneeded, because I'm sure you would know personally, nowhere in the 4E or 5E book did it say no gays allowed, no Asians, no African Americans, and it never said, there's nothing there that said that there are only certain people who could play. And it seems like they've tried to completely tip the scale overwards one way. And I don't know what it is about D&D, but I kind of saw it first in D&D. I didn't notice the movie stuff until later on, but like, it's the oddest thing, because, I don't think you or me or any other other D&D player really fucking cares about the person's sexuality or whose mouth they put, or what they put their mouth on, or what genitals. Like, no one really cares about that. But it's being pushed so hard that it always caught me as extremely off. Now, you were in the ring in a way with like the creation of D&D 5e and 4e and all that fun stuff. So like, what happened where, this like guttural war cry for like the purification of D&D, when and where did that all start? Because I'm trying to figure. That's what really escapes me, is that when I was growing up, D&D was a game for everybody. Like in Oklahoma, I played with the Native American kids, white kids, black kids, Asian kids. It didn't matter. We all played D&D. And in the Army, we all played D&D together regardless of race, because we were all green. We're all Army. And then like I kind of got caught in the shadow of what was really going on. And then when I started doing all this stuff, I kind of went, oh fuck, what happened? Like, so like what happened? Like, was it like this whole like surge of counterculture? Like what happened in your opinion?
Well, it was a gradual process, right? It when back in the 70s and 80s, Dungeons and Dragons was something that emerged from the wargaming hobby, which was basically a kind of a conservative sort of hobby, you could say, right? It wasn't political, but the people that liked to play miniature war games in the 70s and 80s, Napoleonic battles and stuff like that, tended not to be, McGovern Democrats or something like that.
Well, because they had extra money to go spend. They had money to spend on little tiny models, like they worked hard jobs.
Person that's interested in military history doesn't tend to be a leftist, right?
Well, that's not completely true. There are, like gun-toting leftists. They do exist, but for the most part, you are correct. Yes.
And for most of the 70s and 80s, it was a game that was played by a relatively wide variety of people, especially when the initial advanced Dungeons and Dragons fad had become big in society. It was something that all kinds. And there was nothing really inherently seen as political about it, right? Like, and because at that point there wasn't this kind of effort to politicize every aspect of your life, nobody was worrying about it one way or the other. But still, the majority of people that played Dungeons and Dragons at that time were what you could call mainstream people. It probably had because of its Wisconsin origins, a slightly more conservative base than maybe certain other pastimes might. And there were always, there were other people, heavy metal kids and stuff like that. And obviously, the Satanic Panic meant that a lot of people who were gamers were at the very least not, they weren't some of the more religious conservative types. You had a lot of libertarians who were playing D&D, right? Steve Jackson was a big time libertarian, for example, or playing RPGs. I mean, and the moment when that started to change was basically when Vampire the Masquerade came out and the World of Darkness games, which were in the early 90s, they became hugely successful. And a large percentage of the people that played the World of Darkness games, like Vampire and Werewolf and Mage, were people who were not in the hobby before. They joined the hobby when Vampire became popular. And their first game was Vampire the Masquerade. And for a lot of them, their only game was Vampire the Masquerade. And the audience for that game was very different than the standard RPG audience. There was obviously overlap, but whereas the majority, let's say at the university level, the majority of the kids playing AD&D were people that were taking like STEM subjects, right? Like there were a lot of engineers, obviously, right, and science kids and stuff like that. And meanwhile, over there playing Vampire, you had the performing arts kids, the drama kids, and the liberal arts kids, So suddenly there was this influx of this other subculture that tended more towards the left. Now, it wasn't extreme yet because, again, even in the 90s, you didn't have the politicization of popular culture in the way you do now.
Yeah.
But a lot of those World of Darkness kids at the turn of the millennium were the ones that became the story gamers. And the story gamers were the ones that became the social justice warriors of the RPG hobby, So it was an evolution that came along. And one of the big things that changed also was that TSR, the company that made Dungeons and Dragons, went broke. And then it was bought out. Dungeons and Dragons was bought out by Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast is based in Seattle, right? So you went from the Wisconsin location to the left coast, to Seattle, and all of a sudden, almost all the people that were being hired in Seattle to work on Dungeons and Dragons were from a more extreme end of the left than you had in the hobby before, right? Because obviously, Seattle's one of those American cities that tends to be quite hard towards the left. So by the time 5th edition came out, pretty much everybody who was on the regular Wizards of the Coast staff was at the very least, a strong Democrat. Like some of them might have been like John Kerry Democrats and not, they wouldn't be Bernie Sanders Democrats at that point yet, but they were there. They were all on board with Obama and all of that, right? So I would very much doubt that there would have been anyone working on the project who wasn't a consultant that would vote Republican, And then, well, they made that influence into the product,
So it's more like a small festering wound that grew, and that kind of tracks. It really does. But like in terms of entertainment as for more or less has been weaponized towards the left, and it's gonna sound rude to some, and like that's clearly not true, but it has been. Like, in what news article have you seen like the right saying we must take back, or like trying to do these weird things with D&D Entertainment? Like, you don't see any like hardcore right or center right, type folk like pushing hardcore for like reversing equity or like well, I don't know what we even push for. I really don't, because we never really cared. Like, I'm gay, cool, roll your fucking d20, you're taking like 10 minutes. Like, that's how we all kind of thought. While it seems the left is using D&D to bludgeon things. Like, you go on Polygon and it's just, you just read through shit. Like, just like this one, workers behind D&D Magic are speaking up about their company's stance on abortion rights. No one cares about their company's stance on abortion rights. You're a company. Make the card game, make the click clack fucking math rocks, and you're a company. There's no point in knowing your stances about anything. It's a personal stance, and then you have you go ahead. It's fine.
I was saying that's not how they think.
Well,
For them,
well, I know that,
it's
and
always politicize everything. Right. And
well,
no, you're right. Almost nobody who's conservative would do that. Right. So instead, what you see, for example, the OSR is considered a conservative design movement in tabletop gaming, but it's not the same thing, because the leftist movement in taking over Dungeons and Dragons and the products that they put out have explicitly political messages in them, whereas what conservatives are doing is making content that is just free of political messages.
yeah.
That in itself is now a radical right-wing act, right? Because how dare you have a product that doesn't talk about Black Lives Matter or something like that, So that in itself is the new punk rock now, is just to make a game that's only about being a game, right? That crazy. How could anyone think of doing such a thing?
I mean, you say that, but you're not wrong. Like, there's a website called Medium.com that I watch out of morbid curiosity. There's an article by Oscar that says politicize everything because America's becoming Afghanistan. Like, it's hard to get into their mindset of this kind of stuff, or they're pushing these games like Sigmata, and their tagline is "Radio Cyborgs versus Trumpian Nazis." It's always some kind of slant or wing on anti-right, and the right's like, I just want to play an orc, bro. It's and it never fails. And I just don't get it, and when did things stop being about merit? It seems like, for me, D&D especially, because it's like the most blatant. D&D and TTRPGs, they're removing merit for how you actually perform, how you make things, how the product looks, and moving merit to literally your sexuality, and it's completely wild to me. I can guarantee that 90%, not the loud people on Facebook, 90% of Republicans, conservatives, center right, center, don't care about whose genitals you put your mouth on. No one cares. No one cares who you loves. We don't care. We're here to play a game. I know for one thing, Magic the Gathering, they had a big thing where they're highlighting queer artists in Pride Across Multiverse collection, and that's fine, I guess, but you're tokenizing them specifically for no reason. If they have good art, they're good for their merit. If they make good stuff, by all means highlight them, but you shouldn't highlight somebody purely because they are queer or if they're straight. It kind of goes against logic, it's kind of like having this really shit artist who you're like, man, you are fucking shit, but you're gay, so here's your day. It's kind of tokenizing who they are and removing merit completely. You have to be good at something regardless of age, sex, whatever. You gotta be good at it to be awarded for stuff.
Well, this is actually pretty simple. The real motivation behind it. It's that you had this same problem happened, for example, in Soviet countries, where the person that would be in charge of the factory wasn't going to be the one that did the best job. It was who was the best communist, right? The most loyal member of the party.
Yeah.
And what they're doing here is they're using intersectionality, right? These questions of race, gender, sexual identity, and sexual orientation as a way to eliminate the notion of merit, right? Merit, they now say is white supremacy, right? To suggest that somebody should be judged by the quality of their work is somehow itself racist, but it's actually not about representation either. Because, we see this a lot of times. You get people who are, Latinos like myself, or you have Black creators or whatever that end up falling on the wrong side of these people. Some people who get accused, a black man or a Maori or whatever, get accused of being white supremacists.
Yeah.
And that's logical in their mind because those words don't mean what they mean to normal people, right? And to normal person, a white supremacist is a Klansman or something like that.
Well,
Right?
they've changed the words though. They have gone completely underground and taken apart the bulwark that gave words their power. Like being called, being called a Nazi at one point was like, "How dare you? I am not." And now it's like, "Okay, bro, whatever." Like they've kind of stripped the meaning out of words.
Yeah, well, because if you read, they're postmodernists, and if you read Foucault, he talks about this. He says that there isn't such a thing as objective reality, and what actually therefore exists is power, and power is found fundamentally in the establishment of semantics, right? So semantic means like the definition of words. So his argument was that the way in the real world that power actually ends up happening is because you have one group that manages to define the terms in which everybody else must live, right? In which everybody else must interact. Whoever has control of those terms determines what reality really looks like on the ground, and therefore can control what people can and can't actually do. And the postmodernists have always worked on redefining words to mean something totally different than what they were originally meant to mean, as a way to shift the paradigm towards them being in control. So they do this sort of thing very intentionally. They figure out very carefully how to redefine a concept in such a way that it serves them. So one example being that term of white supremacy. But the thing is, where were we here? We were talking about in Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
They how did we lead up to this? I've lost track now.
So basically, how they're robbing merit from things.
Oh, yes, merit, right? Yeah, okay. So here we go. The thing is that the meritocracy is what they're trying to eliminate. They're using diversity as an excuse for this, right? But it's not actually anything like, to them, actual representation has nothing to do with the actual people they're claiming to champion, right? So again, like I said, a black guy who is conservative is to them a white supremacist. So what it actually does, what it's actually for, is so that what they're really doing is, by saying we're hiring these people because they are representations of diversity, all the people that they're hiring have one thing that is not diverse at all, which is that they're all people who have bought into the extreme leftist totalitarian narrative, right? So those are their loyal party members that they've now put in charge. So that's why you get these people that have zero talent whatsoever and that aren't necessarily in any way good representations of their supposed diversity category, but that what they are is very devoted leftists. And so those are the people that end up getting into the positions. This is all a way for them to maintain the social control.
Well, I mean, do they not realize that control's made with money? Like, I mean, they hate to admit this, but the majority of all of these player bases for TTRPGs, war games, even just like movie viewers and the show watchers, they're all mostly center right, and they know they're gonna run. They have to know they're gonna run out of money eventually, right? Like the entire LGBTQ community can't hold them up forever. Like once they piss off enough of the center right folks, or just conservative leaning, or even like central liberal leaning, they're gonna bleed out. Like you can kind of even see it now, like this absolute panic of some of some creators just like trying to like wind back the fishing line because they realize that there's no fish in the fucking pond, and now their family's gonna starve. It's like I don't know if they thought we would just go along with it, like, oh yeah, sure, we'll keep buying it, but you can only keep spitting in the face of the majority of your player base for so long before they get tired of being spat on. Like but basically, I want to see if all the bullshit is true, right? So I went out and I did about 4 months of in-person gaming at this gaming bar, right? And for the most part, I met folks that I would usually see, these normal people. But every once in a while, I would get these absolute fucking lunatics, and for the most part, they were vibrantly haired, dyed-haired people who inserted their sexuality at every fucking moment. And it was just like, it was so grating. And it has to be like a small scale of what it is to be a general user of Magic the Gathering or even Warhammer 40k or Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or anything else really. Constantly, like, when they get their hook in you, it's just constant shit. And they always pester stuff that no one really cares about. Like, this article, it says Dungeons and Dragons next anthology is written entirely by black and brown authors. Like, their color shouldn't matter.
On my YouTube, I've done a couple of videos about it. It's a perfect example because I did the analysis of it, and essentially that book, Radiant Citadel, the newest D&D book,
yes,
is a work project for untalented people that are leftist diversity hires, right? It's pretty bad.
And it seems like they're trying to just push it through. Like, hey, get these brown guys and push it through. And it to me, it seems extremely racist. I come out and say it. I'm not afraid to. It seems particularly racist to choose someone purely based on the color of their skin, not for their merit, and then make them create something they shouldn't be creating. Like by all means, go and find a black or brown creator, as they say in a Polygon article, black and brown authors. Like, at least acknowledge them being for their like nationality or something, or what their heritage. Don't say black and brown if you want to be super woke about it. But like, to me, it seems reversely racist. Like, hey, because you're black, you can write this book and we'll publish you and give you money and yada yada yada. And the guy probably knows nothing about how to write a goddamn book. Like, it just blows my mind that they can be so tone deaf yet try to act so woke. Like, hey, look, it's a book made entirely by brown people. And people are like, well, is it good? And they're like, no, it's not good. And then, like, the book's not going to sell or it's going to get pirated a lot. And then it's going to be a huge fucking money sink. Like, they got to have someone, like, running the numbers on this shit, right? Because, when you think about it, most folks just pirate PDFs of the book anyway. And it takes a love of a thing to make you want to buy it. Like, folks don't have to buy my books. The books I write and narrate are on YouTube for free. But people buy them because they like the thing. They think, oh, this is so good, I want to buy this book, support the author. If you write a shit book, no one's going to buy it. And it's just like, am I just going mad? Or is it like, they're just kind of like, so, Pundit, are they like wearing blinders and trying to ignore the incoming red on the bottom line, or what?
Well, do you want me to give you the really, really short answer to this, or the long answer, or the ridiculously long answer?
You give me the answer that me and chat can digest and understand.
Okay, so let's start with the incredibly short answer, right? The incredibly short answer is that Wizards of the Coast 5th edition was enormously successful, right? When it first came out, and it was relatively it wasn't especially woke, right? It was a D&D edition. If you look at the core rule books as they are right now, and of course they've already said they're going to revise them. I think it's going to be in 2024. They announced they're going to be revised, and that revision is almost entirely, I suspect it's going to almost entirely be political, and then it'll be much more woke. But the original version, the version of 5th edition that I worked on, was not especially woke. It wasn't anti-woke or anything like that, but it was just a good system, and that sold a lot, and it has a lot of inertia, right? So the ongoing popularity of 5th edition is because of the system that it has, which I know that obviously some of the people in your audience might be gamers and might not particularly like 5th edition, because if you haven't played, if you didn't start playing 5th edition, then it's probably not your favorite edition, and I understand that. It's not my favorite edition, that's for sure. But when I helped to design it, the idea that I had and worked with Mike Merles on was that it had to be an edition that was really easy for people to get into and very functional and very modular and easy to change. And it does all of those things. So it was designed not to be the best edition of D&D, but to be the most easily accessible one and the most easy one for people to work with as players or as DMs. And I think it succeeded at that. But they have ever since then become gradually they've been careful at doing it kind of slowly, but building up step by step. Every book is more woke than the last, until the last few books have been extremely woke. And what we know is that basically from about April of 2020 until now, there has been a slow but steady decline in sales of these books, right? So each book is also selling less than previous ones did. So that means that, in fact, fundamentally what you said is right. They are doing worse because they're becoming more woke. But if you want to get into kind of the bigger perspective of this, the tactics of the postmodern left is a tactic that started with an evocation to compassion, right? So like back in, let's say, the first part of the first decade of the century, their whole deal was well, don't you care about black people? Shouldn't you worry about it? And like that sort of thing, playing off of things like middle class guilt and white guilt, right? And that allowed them to make inroads. The step that they're in now is a slightly different step, which is that they're working through fear. And so this is the cancel culture. And so what they're doing is they know that a lot of people are not going to listen to them anymore on this basis of supposed compassion, because that's wearing thin. So now they switch directly to like double down on that and say, well, if you don't agree with us, or even if you don't say anything, right, silence is violence. That means that you're the enemy, and that we have every right to destroy you, right? To make you lose your job, to out you to people and have them harass you, to get you fired, to get you, in trouble with your family, whatever, right? We're going to do everything we possibly can to destroy you. And so people see that and they're too afraid to stand up to them. And that's part of what's maintaining their power.
I mean, you say but there are people who will not come on this show. Like, I try to get a lot of YouTube D&D story narrators and, like, story time folks. And I'm like, hey, come on the channel, we'll discuss D&D, and they will not do it because they know who I am. They know about my book series and my stories and how I game master. They know my chat. They know my Discord. They know my history. They will not come on this channel. Not because they don't like me. Every time they go, hey, I like what you do. I think you're a great guy, but I cannot come on your show. And I go, well, why is that? And they'll go, because my fan base will destroy me. Or they'll simply say, I'm afraid to. And that's why I made this podcast.
I mean, I think that now you see that is also starting to change, because I can tell you in 2013 and 14, when I was already standing up to these assholes, I had tons of people that would write to me privately through my blog or on my message board or by email or whatever, saying, oh, thank you for standing up to them, Pundit. I totally agree with everything you say. I'm like, well, why don't you say so? Oh, no, I can't. I'm scared, right? And everybody's too afraid to say anything, right? And nowadays there are people, because there's a lot of times there was like me and two other guys that were like the only people who would stand up thwart of these guys and tell them no, right? And now, anytime these guys try to pull a cancel culture type of thing, there are hundreds of people that stand up to them, maybe thousands, right? So that's improving. But the problem is that they're already thinking to the next step. And I think that their end goal, because part of what they did, they made use of those first two stages, not just to get kicks or something like that. They went into positions of power, right? They were made into trust and safety councils of online social media websites, and they got into positions in government, and they took complete control of the schools. And so their end goal next is that it won't matter whether you agree or not, because next they're going to have control of all the centers of power, right? So the next stage, if it isn't that they can soft cancel you by public shaming, which is what they're doing now, well, they're hoping that they will be able, because remember, they've got control of the corporate world and of the government and of education and of journalism, right?
Well,
for now, yeah. But they think that they can pull that off into being forever, right? Which maybe they can. It depends. That depends on how much and how smart people are and how much they're willing to fight back. But
yeah, it is true.
But their end goal is going to be that to get to a place where it wouldn't even matter if you oppose them, because they will just be able to shoot you, right? That's the end goal.
Yeah.
It always ends in sort of in the gulag, right? So I don't know that they're going to get there, right? Because you're right that now there has been significant pushback, and it continues to be pushback, and in particular in the corporate world, which had at one point completely wussed out to these people because they had incorrectly, because like I said, another thing that they're very good at is to look like there's way more of them and that they have way more public support than they really do, right? Because they say something like, well, Black Lives Matters, right? And I mean, if you say, well, do Black Lives Matter, yes or no, and you do a poll, 80, 90, 95% of the population would say, yeah, of course Black lives, are important. Sure, right. And so they take that to the corporations and to the government, and they say, see, this is proof that 95% of the population we represent them. They believe in what we're telling you to do, and that's not it, right? That's the Mott and Bailey argument.
Yeah.
So they tricked these large-scale corporations into believing their numbers and believing that they had the real public support, which they did not. And then they made this argument to them, which was always in almost everything, whether you were talking about, comics or movies or video games or Dungeons and Dragons or Gillette razors, apparently. The argument was always the same. It was saying, look, you guys have this market, but this market is just like it's overrepresented in white men and it's underrepresented in everybody else. And so if you would just make your product and your advertisements, you made them oriented towards minority groups and that celebrated minority groups and criticized the racism that had existed before inside your organization, right? And that promoted sexual diversity and so on, then you get all these people from these other groups that would come along, right? Like, the argument for D&D was, well, Black people don't play D&D because D&D has always been just made for white people. But if you made like a bunch of Black representation in D&D or gay representation or representation for women, then you're going to have a million Black people and a million women that are going to come in, a million gay people that are going to all come and play D&D, right? And then you're going to make like 4 times as much money. And so these corporate idiots who don't really understand anything about a culture war, right? They looked at that and they said, oh, okay, well, yeah, great. That sounds, we want to make 4 times as much money. And so then they got him in there. And because the tactic that they always use is to subvert something that is already popular, that is initially already successful,
established,
be it Star Wars or Doctor Who or, Gillette razors or Iron Man or whatever, or Dungeons and Dragons. When their first products come out and the sales are good because that product is already loved, they say, see, this proves it, right? This proves that our idea works. So, oh, yeah, okay, it looks like it works, right? And so then, as soon as they start getting a backlash, at first they'll tell the corporate hacks, oh, no, see, these guys here, these are neo-Nazis. They're all right people. They're evil white supremacists, right, that are just trying to, attack us. And so we have to go even harder. And then we're going to convince all the minority groups that it's safe for them to buy your products. And so they go, okay, yeah, we'll do that, right? And they've been milking this for at this point, 8 years, and finally now some of these people, are starting to be in the corporate world, are starting to realize that this is a dead end, they're finally going to start pushing back.
Well, the thing is, though, there's nothing wrong with giving a little bit of love to a certain, I don't know, cross section of the player pie. What they did wrong was they went too fucking hard, and then instead of creating a big happy family of all these players, they created two fucking battle lines. That's where they kind of fucked up. Instead of saying, "Hey, straights, come play with your gay brethren," they went gays versus straights, and it literally formed two battle lines. Like they have formed two parties, in my opinion.
That wasn't an accident. That was done on purpose. Again, they don't give a two-penny fuck about gender or racial or sexual diversity. All they care about is power. What they were doing, their purpose in highlighting these minority groups is to play them against the dominant civilizational group that they want to demoralize, right? That they want to take down. So this is all intentional. It was never going to be about kumbaya, because if you look at like D&D for the last, since the 90s at least, maybe the 80s, right? There was always representation in D&D, and it was always kind of a kumbaya. And literally D&D is a hobby where nobody cares who you are as long as you can play the game, right? Like it's incredibly open, right? And it was the same in everything else. Like comic books have had, an emphasis on characters that were not, let's say, the white male hero since the 70s again, and they were always had liberal sort of talking points, right? I mean, Marvel Comics was quite liberal for all its entire history, but liberal in the kind of classic JFK Democrat sort of sense, and that wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to destroy that, because specifically that doesn't work for them. What they need is to have a culture war that they think they're going to win,
Well, I mean, that would work if they were the actual majority. And it seems like they're kind of rats on a sinking ship. Once they sink the ship, they scuttle onto another fucking franchise to step in. Look at Star Trek, look at Star Wars, and the same thing happened in D&D. They weigh down the franchise that's established and, like you said, beloved with all their fucking weight. And once they sink it, they fucking scuttle off to another one. And I think some of the biggest examples of that is definitely like Doctor Who, and then also Star Trek. Those are probably the two biggest ones. They got destroyed
by these people. Yeah.
And they got targeted first.
That's also intentional. That's also intentional, because their war is a war on Western civilization as a whole, right? On Western culture. They see it as a fundamental evil, and if they're going to create their new utopia, they have to tear down all of the underlying narrative, again, to go back to Occult and the postmodernists. They have to tear down, they have to deconstruct all of these things that the culture values, right? Stories like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, to a much lesser extent Doctor Who, are stories that, and Superman, right, and all of that. They're stories that contain certain fundamental moral concepts that are seen in our society and have always been seen as good, right? Truth, justice, and the American way, and stuff like that, right? Star Wars is about idealistic young heroes that are pushing back against an oppressive empire, right? All of these stories have elements to them that are reflections of what had happened earlier in Western canon of literature and myth. That isn't anything special. I mean, it's not everybody knows that, right? But that's their point, is that they want to specifically, part of the project is not just to take control of these things, but to kill everything but the name, right? To tear down everything about it, right? You see this. One of the moments where you see this really, really clearly is in the second of the new Star Wars movies, where you have at the very beginning of the movie, you have this battle that's going on between the rebels and the new empire or whatever. And you have the pilot guy, Poe Dameron, I think he is. Mm-hmm. He's flying in there, just like, Luke Skywalker did in the previous trilogy. And he has this crazy idea that just might work, and it's super risky, but he's such a great flyboy that he's going to do it, right? And that is an established literary narrative of Star Wars, right? That's the right choice for him to make, right? It's a reflection. It's meant to reflect what the Red Squadron did in the very first Star Wars movie when they went up against the Death Star, right? It's about people who are determined enough and virtuous enough and desperate enough and that don't give up to be able to have one person make a difference and take down the evil, but in this movie, in The Last Jedi, it's completely wrong, right? And he's punished for it afterwards for the whole rest of the movie, until he learns that yes, he was wrong to do that, because it's not about him being a hero, it's about the collective, right? It's about worrying about everybody and not trying to do these heroic things, but trying to be collectively caring about each other, So that was an intentional work of very consciously crafted deconstruction of one of the fundamental tropes of Star Wars as Western myth. It was to defeat that idea of individual heroism, which they hate, and the Last Jedi was in some ways it was a masterpiece example of deconstructionism, because it does that to everything about Star Wars at some point in the movie. So this is part of their intentional effort as well. And I was going to say, you were talking about how they're not the majority. No, they're not. They're a very, very tiny minority. They're about 8% of the population, but they don't want to be the majority. They never believed in that. Keep in mind, again, some of their heroes, right? The Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union were never the majority. They were, in fact, the minoritarian group in the communist revolutionary movements in Russia. But they won because they took over the centers of power. And in Cuba, when Fidel Castro took down the Batista regime, he only had about 20 men. That was it. But he created the hype that made it look like there was this enormous army coming out of the Sierra Madres and that the Batista regime was doomed. And so they completely morally collapsed. And he went in, and as he was going from town to town, all the people followed him because they thought they were joining this gigantic revolution. And it was really just him and 20 guys that were left, So their goal is not to be the majority. They wouldn't want that. They're fundamentally elitists, right? The reason they hated D&D in the 2000s was because it was what the unwashed masses played. And they literally used that term in writings that they wrote about, story games and things like that. That these people are the unwashed masses, and we're the ones that are playing the real sophisticated games,
Right,
but they don't need
Thirsty Sword Lesbian and all the little shit games that they come up with, yeah.
They just need to have the illusion of mass power in order to win, and that's what they bank on, Will they succeed? I don't know. I really hope not, but it does kind of depend on how quickly they are stopped, because they have now gotten to levels of power in Western society that you would never have imagined they could have gotten to, and it's going to be very, very hard to get rid of them, right? At this point, almost every Western institution is completely compromised and will have to either be torn down completely or massively purged and then rebuild from the ground up.
Well, here's one of the things. This is talking about, the time of Fidel Castro and the Bolsheviks. There wasn't as freedom of communication as we have now. And if you go on YouTube for even half a minute after trying to get through all the YouTube flag they put out in front of you, there is a huge broadcasting stream where they cannot, but basically, they can't wiggle the way in because there's all these forums of people who can, say, hey, this is what they're fucking doing. Like right now, even if you go on Twitch and do this, no problem. It's not like the Bolsheviks of the past. It's not like Fidel Castro. People go, no, look, right here, this is bullshit. We pull up the fucking, the charts and say, hey, look, they're losing money right now.
Yeah, but that's why they're so obsessed with controlling the major social media sites and with controlling the algorithms, right? With, I've got a YouTube channel. It's very successful. It's successful by word of mouth, because YouTube's never going to promote my channel, right? And that they're going to promote channels that are the right politics,
Yeah.
But never one that isn't the right politics, and they've set it up that way. So there are a lot of people if I go on my Twitter stream, I'll see tons of people that are pointing out the whatever the latest political bullshit is that the Democrats have been up to, right? But the average person is never going to see that because they're going to be fed by, and whenever I get like recommended by Twitter, in spite of me, being very, very much a kind of Trumpian conservative, the things they recommend to me are always left-wing viewpoints, right? They're always making the other argument, and it's not because I've looked for that at all. That's not how it works anymore, right? You do a Google search for something, do a Google search for, well, maybe right now it wouldn't be the Hunter laptop anymore, but that would have been a good one a few months ago. Or let's say you did that, and the first 5 pages are going to be explanations of why that's a hoax or that's not. The Hunter did nothing wrong. There's no proof of anything. Blah blah blah. You'll have to search for at least 5 or 10 pages before you'll get to a single article that's in that search that provides the actual counter facts, And this is why they're in an absolute panic at the idea that Elon Musk might take over Twitter, because they need to maintain the social media monopoly to maintain total control of the narrative. As soon as you've got one of these places, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, any of the major ones, as soon as one of those ends up going not conservative, but just free speech, right, an open market of ideas, right, where you get equal weight in terms of what a search engine will reveal, whether it's right wing or left wing, they lose because they always lose on the argument, which is why they refuse to come on shows and argue with people on the right, because they know they can't.
Tell me about it, man. Like I target them. Like I'll go in and I'll target them specifically. Like, hey, man, you are the exact opposite of me. Come on my show. We'll have a chat. And I'm some lowbrow fucking nobody dude, and they still won't fucking do it.
Of course not, because that doesn't work for them. The right thing for them to do in that case, when you make that invitation, is to call you a Nazi and call for you to be banned, right? And to say we're not going to give you a platform, even though you're inviting them onto your show.
Yeah,
right?
like my literal like you say it like controlling things. Like, I write books, and I was trying to get like actually published because everyone tries out the first time. Hey, I'll try and get published, and I'll get known. I'll be J.K. Rowling, yada yada. And you always send out the emails, right? But in order to send out those emails, you gotta go headhunt these these agents and everything else, and you cannot take a step without hitting agents and these people who kind of go through all the books without saying only accepting LGBTQ books, only accepting books by colored authors, yada yada yada. And the simple will say not accepting what was it, like scripts, or I forget the actual terms it for, but not accepting yada yada from white authors, not accepting yada 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 from subjects about any like guns, like that's like no. And like okay, and like you have to have a black female lesbian transgender main character just to get fucking published. And I finally had one guy, hey, you know what, we like how your story is, we like how like the narrative, but can you change a few things? And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to change? Can you make your main character a woman? Like, no. Well, can you make her a Latino woman? Like, no, I can't do that. Well, can you make him gay? It's like, gay for who? We think him being gay for the tiny harpy boy who's supposed to be like a sun paradigm, make him gay with that character, it'd be great. But no, that's not how that's written. Like, I spent like emails going back and forth with people. They wanted me to change the entire book. Like, not just that, but again, I saw the political nature of it, because in this book, the United States sends in internet weirdos to help secure the other side of the veil. And the bad guys are the UN, because UN is UN, and the unseelie court is a seelie court with UN in front of it. It's kind of like a little like nudge towards Fey folklore. And they said, can you make? And I remember they said, it'd be great if you could make the UN the good guys, and obviously the president is Trump, because I made make a joke like our caves are the best caves. I made a little joke in there about the book. Can you make the Trump regime the bad guys? I was like, that's not the point of what it is. And it's just like they grilled me for like a month and a half. That can you change your entire book and then we'll publish you and give you money? And it's like, this is how it works. Like that for me. That's when it clicked. Okay, this is how it works. That's why all the books are shit. Why all the movies are shit. Because you got like thumb through these corridors just to get your shit out there. And then when you finally get noticed, they have all these little check boxes they want to knock off and make sure it fits the party line. And it was just the worst. And then of course there's this one chat block here I put in the Discord chat, not ours, but I can send to you real quick actually. But I'm used to this part because they will crab bucket you like no fucking other, man. I'll send you this so you can actually look at it. But this guy named Cooper Leher, I'm sure he's beating his dick under his desk because I'm mentioning his name. But this is on my video about D&D safety tools. And he says, Matt Mercer, Brennan Lee Mulligan, and Abria Leininger, who's a shit DM, by the way. The DMs from Critical Role and Dimension 20 did a roundtable last month. You can hear them talking about how they value safety tools. Then he says he has a video link, and then below it goes, Dimension 20 has 568k subscribers on here. Critical Role is 1.77 million. Maybe safety tools are fine. They put might is right at all fucking times. And it pisses me off to no end how they go, look at all these people who are right and you're wrong. And it's just like...
all those people are bots,
yeah.
Not all of them. But I noticed something very interesting. When was it? I think it was back when the Ravenloft book came out.
Oh.
And
yeah.
the really woke Ravenloft. And they had pointed me to the official Dungeons & Dragons YouTube channel, right? Now, my YouTube channel it's got over 5,000 subscribers. At the time, it had maybe 4,500 subscribers or something like that, So by the standards of like big time YouTube, it's kind of small, right? And the official D&D channel had like 220,000 subscribers, right? But then I started looking at the view counts and the like counts, and they were the same as mine, right? Like a video might get 5,000, 6,000 views, 10,000 at the most, and like the likes were quite small. And so I realized, oh my God, these guys, nobody actually watches this channel, like the proportion, the percentage.
But the thing is, they put value in numbers. Because I said, nah, stick tools are fucking dumb, because that's my opinion. And he goes, and his comment is D20, 568k, Critical Role, 1.77 million, 23k, and then like a little like sad face. And he says, maybe alt-right hate and trolling isn't a winning brand. It's so blatant of how NPC they are. Like, promote our brand.
Look, my answer to that, besides the fact that it's not trolling, right? But and it's not based on hate. It's based on actually loving the hobby, and my actually loving the hobby, and designing stuff that isn't about wokeism, means I'm one of maybe like less than 12 people who are not working for a major design company that makes a full-time living off of RPGs, and it bought me a 3-bedroom house. So I think I'm doing pretty damn well,
But it's just the fact they put all this worth in their brand, and if you're not their brand, if you're counterculture to their brand, you are wrong, you are alt-right, and you are a hater. And it's just like, really.
But besides that, look at it's a winning culture for who, right? Because Wizards money, but they're actually making less money than they used to, right? And then all these people, all the wokeists, all of them, the products that they make, they're making less money than I am, and you see this over and over again. There's people like, for example, very recently there was this RPG Kickstarter called Coyote and Crow, which is an RPG that starts with the idea of an alternate history where the first and most important detail is that a comet hits the Earth in 1300 AD and lands in Europe, and all the white people die, right? So there's never colonialism. And then because of that, the Native Americans in North America develop into a super advanced utopian society. So a stupid book, right? But they end up, Indian Wakanda. Somebody just posted on the stream chat.
Hold on, Pundit. Here's the thing, though. They can say that a comet comes in and destroys all the white people, and the Indians and Native Americans and the Africans can all spur up. If someone wrote a book about a comet destroying all the black people and all the tan people on a planet, they'd be labeled as a fucking Nazi.
Like,
They'd be labeled as far racist right.
yeah, well, in fact, when that game came out, I did a video that was talking about overtly racist RPGs, where I pointed out that a book like Coyote and Crow is no different than the game created by Varg Vikernes, the neo-Nazi.
Yeah, I saw that,
Which
and of course that one is
is
also
all
trash.
along similar lines. Yeah, exactly. But the point is that the Kickstarter raised about $1 million, right? And everybody was going, aha, you see, you couldn't ever raise $1 million. I'm like, well, I don't use Kickstarter for starters, but they all thought that meant, well, these guys are all insanely rich now. And fast forward to today, well, to this week actually, about 6 months after the Kickstarter. And the guy who was in charge of that game has suddenly written this appeal to try to get people to buy his books because he's broke, right? And you ask yourself, well, how does that happen, right? Well, for starters, it's because they have like these collective efforts of these teams of like 50 people that are working on this project, right? And so when you take away the Kickstarter fees, the printing fees, the fact that they don't know basic accountancy, so they underestimate how much everything's going to cost, or they overestimate how much they're going to be able to put out product. So they're losing a ton of money there. Then whatever is left gets divided by like 50 people. Like, so they made less on that entire project than I make in a week.
Well, to note, they made that money on sanctioned racism. It's what it is. And these guys who I want to bring on here are too afraid to call it that. This is sanctioned racism, is what it is.
Well,
if you can make that book, but you can't make a book about killing all the colored folks, it's still racist. Like, all the white people are gonna die, and it's still racist. It's still destroying entire cultures, entire civilizations, just for the color of their skin. And the thing is that I think both ideas, whether killing all the black folks and white folks or tan folks or whatever folks, killing certain peoples, it is inherently racist, and both are bad. But one is accepted by the ruling class, quote unquote, who are currently like, no, this is good. All white people die. And it's just like, come on, bro. Like, you would think they'd be better than this, like being adults. But then again, I'm sure you've seen the Twitter post about them like just failing at fucking everything. So it's kind of all, it's all in line, I guess. It's just, I don't know. It's so tiring. And I have one more subject I want to talk about, because I actually blame these guys most of all, right? And like, I don't blame Mission 20 or even actually I actually quite like Jenny D. I actually asked her to come on the show and talk, because she's the exact opposite of me. But I figured, hey, get you on here, but she hasn't replied back yet. She probably never will, which is fine. But I actually blame Critical Role for a lot of this, because in the beginning, Critical Role was quite cowboy. They're quite punk rock with what they were doing, and now they're corpos. And it was kind of weird watching that shit evolve, like live and in color. You know what I mean?
Well, it's really incredible actually, because you think about, I was, when I was in my 20s, in the 1990s, in my teens and in my 20s. I believed in free speech. I didn't believe in censorship. I was anti-war. I didn't particularly like corporations. And all of that basically made me somebody on the left, right? And now I have almost all of the same views, and that makes me somebody in the extreme right, according to them.
I know. Well, the line has moved so far left. If you were a center, you're not considered far right. Because they just dragged that line a couple hundred yards.
It's not just that it moved. It's that the people that took over the left have, instead of defeating the establishment, which was, let's say, even as recently as Occupy Wall Street, the goal was taking down the corporate government establishment.
The corpos.
Instead of that, they became that establishment, and now suddenly it's great, right? Like, can you imagine 10 years ago if you told the average Democrat that the left in 2022 would be expressing unqualified, unquestioning support for the FBI, the pharmaceutical companies, the big mainstream social media companies, and supporting, say, social media censorship and saying we need more of that. Like the guy would have thought you were insane, right?
And I mean, and one of those things where, like, just come back to Critical Role, they are, quite frankly, the biggest, like, speaking horn for this establishment culture, I guess, because it does track. In the beginning, Matt Mercer and party were very cavalier. They're very, like, alternative punk rock. We're gonna make D&D popular, and it was great until they got popular. And I swear to God, you can tell where these people got their fingers in them, and it's like you see things turn all of a sudden. Like, suddenly their stories were predictable. Like, to quote a fantastic music group, you could tell it's going to happen by Page and Age 5. The bad guys die and the good guys survive. In the early games, it was all very normal D&D. People died. There was danger. There was, peril with the players, and a few players died. But now, if you look at D&D now, they're selling a thought process, they're selling a product, and they're selling basically leftist talking points, it seems like. And it's got to the point where, like, I'll go on TG on 4chan. There's always a Critical Role thread there, and we're always like, anything happened yet? Like, nothing ever fucking happens, And then, because of that, of the latest campaign, Matt Mercer wanted to set his shit in, like, Arabian Nights. It's quite clear it's what he wanted, And when that happened, they tried to light them up for appropriating culture. Like, they tried that. Like, well, you can't do that because you're a white DM. And it was so weird watching a liberal like Matt Mercer backpedal like a motherfucker and trying to apologize. And now this new campaign is honestly just fucking dog shit. And then after that, you saw, like, what was that article where, like, they said that it's okay to deem it as a person of color? Like, I'm sure you saw those fucking articles, right?
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
Like,
absolutely, but it's only okay if you follow all of their rules, and even then, they still reserve the right to call you a racist at any moment, right?
Yeah, like, you gotta walk down this narrow corridor, and if you're a white guy, one wrong step and boom, you are a Auschwitz Jew gassing Nazi, and it's like it's just fucking ridiculous. Like, there's no way in hell that it should be like that. You should be able to do what you want to fucking do. Like, the censorship is absolutely unbounded, and these people will bite the hand that feeds them. Like, they will literally attack people on their side, like Critical Role. Critical Role is liberal, all right? It is, in my opinion, far left. And even then, I remember,
they're all voice actors in Hollywood. They're B-grade actors that were desperate to make it, right? I mean, so every one of them is at the very least a Hillary Clinton level liberal, like.
I mean, and the thing is, that's fine. That's completely fine if they want to roll that way. But they're being used as this platform to further push this anti-whatever agenda. Like, I mean, you go on there, and I swear to God, every other character is a flamboyant rainbow character who is constantly either gay or asexual or whatever. And it's just like, oh my God. Like you can literally, like...
It's the price of being successful for anybody who is making their media in the mainstream now, because that's just what it is. And in the case of the Critical Role people, I think they don't mind that at all. They understand that that's what that's what you do, right? And they're very happy to do it because they believe in those things. But it's very simple. When they were probably, I mean, I never liked Critical Role, but they were probably better and more authentic when they were starting and didn't think this was going to be their living. And then, of course, as soon as it became big enough that they were like, oh wow, we can live off this, then you've got to become much more of a mainstream sellout,
Well, no, you don't have to. You really don't. You can have your own brand and keep doing what you love and make money. But the thing is, they sold out.
But you couldn't be approved by the mainstream then, and that's what they wanted. They wanted the mainstream success, right?
Their money didn't come from mainstream.
The only place you're going to find, punk rock in tabletop role is the OSR. They're the only ones that don't give a shit about what the writers at Polygon think.
I mean, and unfortunately, like, it's one of those things. You literally you can find all the cringe you want on Polygon or Wired. Like, D&D must grapple with what I was reading. It came out in January. Must grapple with racism in fantasy. Like, huh? Well, of course there's gonna be racism in fantasy. Like, not everyone, not everyone's gonna like each other in fantasy. And there's this whole thing about orcs. I'm sure you know about that shit. How they read so deep in the orcs they saw like a minority.
Yeah. Liberals think black people are orcs.
Yeah,
Which
and
feels a little bit about liberals,
well, the thing is, at no point did anyone on the center or the right say, that sounds like a black person. Ain't no one fucking said that shit. Ain't no one.
No, it's nuts. It's completely nuts.
Yeah.
But it's the narrative they wanted to push. So suddenly they made it seem like this was just an accepted truth, right? And if you don't want to be canceled by them, you have to say, oh yeah, and it's terrible, and we can't do that, right?
Well, it's just the fact that they skip to that beat so fucking quick, and I guess it helps when you control the entire thing. Anyway, like, oh yeah, it's racist. Oh, it is racist. Click, and since that fucking snowball, there's now no negative modifiers. Everyone is good, and there are no bad people, and it's just like this fucking utopia they're trying to dream up.
Yeah, they've removed race as a mechanic from D&D, right? Every character just gets 2 random choices of ability score bonuses, and it, there's no difference whatsoever between an ogre and a halfling,
Yeah, and it's just it's so dumb, because not only is D&D plagued by too many races in the first place for the planet they're on, they do the whole multi-plane shit, but I mean, there's going to be conflict in things. I know some folks use Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop RPGs to escape reality, right? But it seems like
sorry.
Go ahead.
This is also part of what I was talking about with deconstructionism, right? They need to, D&D is based on fantasy. Fantasy is based on the canon of Western myth. And that canon of Western myth has certain moral teachings within it, right? The struggle of good versus evil, right? The ability of, the hero's journey of one person to make a difference in the world, the necessity to fight against barbarism, and to defend the light of civilization. All of those are things that are part of D&D. And what they're doing in all of this, and they're, I have made a lot of videos about this on my channel, where I point out that the goal that they have for role-playing games and what they consider the only acceptable setting is essentially 2022 Seattle. You can't have a setting that has values that are different than that, because their goal is to create a kind of year zero of RPGs, to say, role-playing games have a very important role to play in indoctrination of people of what are the right values. So the only values that can be shown are our values, which means that you have to have gay pride parades on the streets of Waterdeep, and you have to have people who are celebrating diversity of all kinds, and there's you have to have the representation. And just beyond that, people have to act in every one of these products that they put out and in all of their live shows and all of that sort of stuff. You see the way that they expect you to play with the characters in the world. Those characters have to act as though that they're people living in New York or Portland or Seattle today, right? They have to speak in modern ways. They have to have all the modern values, even though whether it's a medieval setting or a fantasy setting or an apocalyptic setting. They have to behave and look, and especially have the politics of our modern world. Because if you present anything else, you are suggesting that other thing is somehow viable in some way, which is not really the case. Like, when all of my settings are not commentaries on the modern world, but to them, if it isn't anything that doesn't push their ideology is by definition an enemy of their ideology, right? It's not enough that it just be neutral. Its very existence is a threat to their totalitarian goal. That's why they're totalitarians, right? They want it to be total.
Well, we all know why, because to be frank, they're mostly just weak people. I mean, they've had no adversity in their life. They've been coddled probably all their fucking life. And that's the thing they can't wrap their head around, in my opinion, because I've had a lot of fucking adversity in my life, I'm tell you. And even in fantasy, there has to be there's always going to be butting heads, adversity, problems, death, destruction. You can't have a utopian whatever in anything. It's not how it fucking works. And all this push for like orcs and dwarves are created equal, there's no genetic determinism in fantasy tradition. Like, no, there always will be. And because there is in real life. It's going to infect everything. Not everyone is going to like everybody. Because things just happen naturally. And these people who are coddled for all their life and don't know adversity, even in the lowest forms, like having to work like work hard jobs to make money. Like I used to do roofing, for God's sakes. And then I joined the army. Like, I know hard work and it fucking blows dick, but it does teach you about suffering and pain and how earning things is and a hell of a lot about fucking merit. And these people, and I don't mean like, you people, but these fucking people who try and control these things and remove these aspects don't understand merit in history and how people just sometimes are not going to get along and how they're just sometimes really fucking stupid people. Like, and
it looks as though it's a tremendous irony, but it's actually something that had to obviously be true, which is that the people that constantly complain about privilege are the most privileged part of the most privileged generation in the entirety of human history, right? Well, there are people that have literally never had any adversity whatsoever, because SJWs, we know this, that they did studies of like Antifa groups and stuff like that, right? And almost all of them are either chronic students, right? People who are just, who are in university until their 30s, or they're trust fund babies, they're all people that are there. None of them are the proletariat, right? There are no communists anymore that are standing up for the sheet workers and the carpenters or some shit like that, right? Yeah. They're people that have gone to like very high level schools, which have now been subverted so that they don't really get a real education, but they get all the indoctrination that they're meant to get, and so they're the most dangerous of people because they're midwits, right? They're moderately educated. And they've also never actually had to face any real challenge in their lives, which means that they pick incredibly frivolous things and think that those things are enormous traumas in their lives,
Which brings me all the way to my main point. The whole point of this thing was safety tools. I'm just kidding. But safety tools are a great symptom of this. And it's why I said these are fucking stupid, because they are. You don't get to say, no, I don't want to do that in life. Sometimes you're going to get the shit beat out of you by the troll and dragged up a fucking mountain and thrown off a cliff. You can't just go, no, I don't want to do that. And only these people who have never had to deal with the bullshit of a hard life think they can do that. Like, they can say, no, I don't want to do that. Like, once this ball's rolling, you get to say, no, I don't want to do that. You just got to roll with that ball and hope it doesn't kill you in the back end. And I think these safety tools and how they're touted by some, as according to the fucking dipshit in my comment section, these are by far the biggest like pustule on the body of D&D, and it's a symptom of this infection. And as bad as it sounds, this is why gatekeeping exists. Like, and people hate this whole thing, oh, gatekeeping's bad. Not really, no. Gatekeeping is how you preserve the thing you like, and is how it is. Like, my community gatekeeps itself, for God's sakes. We had a few run-ins with these types, and like in the book series, there's a female brim touch. It's a kind of horn person, and a human walks up, or go, basically a big trench warfare setting. Human jumps up and tomahawks her right in the fucking forehead. right? Because shit happens in war. The pretty chick's gonna fucking die in combat. But I got emails saying, how dare you fucking kill a woman in combat? Like, bullets are not gendered. You don't have male and female bullets. Bullets are designed to kill. War kills. And at no point can you go, no, this can't happen because my mind says it can't. It's why I think in the United States we should have like mandatory fucking basic training. People can feel hunger, pain, cold, heat. Like, I can only imagine what these people do every day. You know, like just on Twitter, ticky-tacking away, fighting for justice under fucking AC fucking office. Like, I just don't get it. Like, there's always attack on gatekeeping. Like, you can't gatekeep. It's yada, yada, yada. But no, it's designed to keep people like them out because they infect and destroy a beloved whatever it is. And it always, you see all the memes about, you know, what happens when the thing gets infiltrated. Basically, it's like a, you know, I'm sure you know the meme, right? Where it shows like a thing and then it starts like changing the more people get into it because it's not being gate kept. And the thing that you love is not something you fucking hate. And
that's right.
It's a constant story because it's fucking true. Look at Star Trek. Look at Doctor Who. Look at Star Wars. You have to fight vigorously and fervently to keep things the way they should be. That's not saying you make it wide only or straight only or anything, but keep it the way the thing should be, how it is. Because Star Trek alone was never not woke. Star Trek was hella fucking woke for what it was. And they still fucking ruined it. And it's just like, how the fuck did you pull this off? Like, one of the only things that had Abraham Lincoln call you know, talking to a black woman, and they figure shit out. Like, even for the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was fucking woke as shit. And for them, it was,
of course, yeah.
And if
series was,
well, yeah, but
extremely.
But for them, it wasn't woke enough. And here's the thing, though. Whatever you're like, it'll never be X enough. It'll never be gay enough. It won't be woke enough. It won't be anti-white enough. They'll always keep chewing along until there's a bone left.
Yeah, because none of those things are their actual goal. Again, power is their actual goal. You know, they're all of the wokeism is just to them a weapon by which they obtain power. So it by definition, it can never be enough. That's the point. If you do everything that they told you you're supposed to do in 2020, now, and you do that today, you're a Nazi. Right? So this is the way that they work is that it means you can never end up being satisfactory to whatever the current definition is, because the current definition is constantly recreated and retroactively assumed to have been always the right way to do things. And so therefore, unless you're constantly bowing to their demands, you're going to be condemned. Yeah. You know.
And now on the back end again, like me, for instance, you know, I'm straight now, but when I see these things like queer creators win big at Gen Con's any awards for 2022, I like, after looking at all the non-meritorious shit, all the tokenizing going on with this RPG community and all that, I look at it and I go, how can I trust that? How can I trust that these people won their thing via merit and not because they were gay or queer or whatever? Well,
it's very simple. They didn't win because of merit. It's, you know, the Ennies have not been about merit for a very, very long time. Right?
But that's the thing. But how do you know you're good? How do you know you're doing a good job if you're not being amplified by your merit?
Because the measure of success is not about the quality of the product you produce. It's about the identity that you project and how that serves the agenda of the progressive movement, right? So, like, you know, like I think it was Diversity in Comics that made an argument about this at one point that, you know, in normal superhero stories, the story might be something like, well, you saw your parents get murdered in an alley and then dedicated your life to becoming a vigilante to stop crime, you know. And that's like, you know, the start of a superhero story, right? But the start of a superhero story in the kind of new breed of comics is you're a black bisexual woman. That's it. That's the story, right? It's no longer about any kind of hero's journey. It's about what you're representing, and that's all that needs to happen, right? So you end up with stories that have no growth, no development of any kind. All that matters is that you fill in the requisite
You check the
items
box.
of worship to the woke cult, you
Yeah.
know.
And that's why I think that inherently all the shit they're doing is racist and tokenizing. They're making like this is our token gay black superhero. Like, did they earn it? Did they like you ever read the comic? Like I'm not. Don't call me Starfire. I'm not Starfire. That fucking dumpster trash. Uh, fucking comic where they made Starfire's daughter super fat and goth. I'm like, what the? Like you're reading it, like you're like, okay, maybe I can get into it and realize, oh no, it's retarded. Never mind. Like you kind of set it down. And I swear they're all like creatively bankrupt. Like there's not a creative bone in any of their bodies combined. They're following this pattern. It's literally like a script.
This was also part of how they recruit and what they benefit from, right? It's very interesting. Back in the early days of the I'm bringing it back again because this is all history repeated itself in
It
some ways.
really is, yeah.
In the Union, right after the Russian Revolution, Lenin and Trotsky made a point of putting people into positions of power in their new regime who were in some form or another social outcasts, right? People who were physically deformed or who had been, lifelong criminals, or people who were deviants, known deviants of some kind, and stuff like that.
Hey, babies,
People
whatever.
intentionally that were intentionally looked down upon by society, not out of some kind of compassion, but for two very clear reasons. One was that these people who would never have been able to reach any position of power whatsoever without having been promoted by the Bolsheviks will have absolute loyalty to the regime, right? Because they know that if the regime falls, they go back to being nothing, right? But second, it was also because it means that now everybody that's living under the regime has to go through the exercise of recognizing and celebrating these people as the heroes of the revolution. And it's a means to make sure that you get ideological obedience, right? When you're forced to celebrate, how stunning and brave these people are, or something like that, that is a way that you have given them power and that it establishes their authority. And if you refuse to do that, then that's where they can take measures against you, right? And the same thing has happened here. These were people, like, again, the story games movement was their big movement in the early 2000s in tabletop role playing, and it failed because nobody wanted to play their goddamn stories, right? They were all stupid games, right? Their design was inferior, right? They had all these like ridiculous pseudo academic theories of game design, none of which were right. So they were absolute mediocrities, and now they've latched on to wokeism because it doesn't matter how untalented you are, right? All that matters is that you fulfill the right ideological profile, and therefore you get promoted. And the last thing they want is for someone who's actually competent to be the one that's promoted, right? That's almost a counter. It's almost like a disadvantage for a person if they're too talented, because they wouldn't be controllable, right? They want the people who get praised to be people who know that if wokeism collapses, they go back to being nothing.
Well, because they came as nothing. They weren't brought here by merit. They weren't brought because they're a good writer or a good artist or a good DM. Why not? Let's put that out. But they're literally being brought out and carted around purely because they toe the party line. And that's not how it should be. And anyone who's worked a job knows how it shouldn't be. You should be rewarded for your work. You don't, because everyone's had that one coworker who does not do the work, and then like still gets paid like you piece of shit. Like everyone learns about merit, but like in their first job or like their first profession or their first whatever, their first big thing they do in life, and you learn.
Some people have no merit, and then they're going to dedicate their lives to getting around that. Like going back to the statistics on Antifa membership, for example, right? Pretty much everybody who's in Antifa that isn't either a trust fund baby or a registered sex offender works in some level of education, right? Everything from preschool teacher all the way up to university professor, right? And why? It's because that is the institution that was the first institution to be taken over by postmodern socialists. And it's an institution that is famous for merit not factoring into it, right? If you're a teacher, your merit is irrelevant, right? They can't fire you no matter how horrible you are. Sometimes even if you commit a crime, and your promotion is based purely on time served, so it's a perfect job for someone who has no actual marketable ability, That, and we've known that since forever, right? Those who can't teach, that's a pretty old saying. And so this is
it is actually, isn't it?
This is an area where they were able to shine, and what they're trying to do is turn everything into that, because that means that suddenly somebody who's really talented is not going to benefit because of their talent in that field anymore, right? So like what's happening now, of course, is that you get very talented people that go into an counterculture of, ironically, of tradition and merit, right? So in the RPG area, it's the OSR, right? Anybody who's actually, the OSR is the most cutting edge design movement in role-playing games today, and all of the very best role-playing games and the ones that are the most interesting adventures, the most interesting campaign books, all of that is being produced by the OSR, because the OSR is 100% merit-based. It has no hierarchy. There's no leadership or pump of the OSR. There's no one company controlling it. It's mostly very small press, some of which become bigger and more successful because of promoting merit, right? But it's an area where the only thing that matters is, will the people that have found out that the OSR exists like your product or not? And if they like your product, you're gonna sell, right? And if they don't, they won't, right? And there is no room for like woke virtue signaling in the OSR, not the real OSR anyways. You've got this kind of counter OSR that SJWs have created that is, it's very not successful and not particularly imitated or anything like that, but they've always just they've always failed, and they hate the OSR because it's so decentralized. There's no way for them to take control of it,
Well, you can't attack
and they'll being overshadowed by the products that are actually good,
Yeah. Like my RPG book is definitely not OSR because it's not 5e compatible, but it kind of nods towards the old play styles,
The OSR isn't 5e compatible. The OSR is games that are compatible with the original D&D rules, right? So most OSR games are actually based. Originally, they were based on like Basic Expert and AD&D, and nowadays what you have is a lot of variant rules. Like my Lion and Dragon book, which you've got in the little image that you got for my for my avatar here. It starts with the D&D kind of basic format, and then it's changed a lot of stuff to fit specifically a real medieval setting, right? Not like medieval fantasy, which is like Renaissance Fair Funland sort of stuff. But if you want to play in the War of the Roses, right, or in the Crusades or something like that,
It's
based on like magic was like in the Middle Ages, what people thought magic was like, and the monsters are all authentic historical monsters, right? So stuff like that.
I've heard like Mork Borg and Gangbusters, but mine uses a action point system. But that's besides the point. Well, the main point I think I want to get at of our discussion in general is that I think we can both agree that hey, Onimir, how you doing?
Off topic. Gotta sling my shot.
Hold on a second.
Himalayan harpies and the chicken coop cult.
Chicken coop cult? What the fuck is that? Thank you for the 900 bits, Oni. I appreciate that. But I think the point that I want to get the most of all of this is that, these gay players, these queer players, the whatever you want to call them players, you're being used. I mean, is the biggest point of all this is that you're being used and tokenized to further an agenda. I can guarantee if you're a gay, lesbian, person of color, Latinx, whatever, if you have all those adjectives next to your name, if you go on your usual, like go on Twitter or Reddit and say, hey, I'm yada, 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 but man, I sure do like guns. Watch how quick they fucking drop you. Because I've seen this happen. I've been on Reddit and like trolling along, because you go on Reddit, it's kind of like a zoo for me. Like you can't go there to kind of stare at the animals, you know what I mean? And I watched one guy say, he was a, what was he? I forget what his banner was, but it was some like asexual, whatever majig. He was talking about, and he goes, hey, I really want to incorporate more weapons into, like, more like modern weapons into my D&D game. And someone said, hey, why is that? Well, I kind of got into guns, over COVID because I was bored, and I got into airsoft and kind of went on. And someone said, cool, so you're a Nazi now. And they lit him on fire in that Reddit section. I was like, what in the fuck? And it truly does ring to form that they don't care about you. You will find more acceptance as a gay D&D player with us than you will on the other side. Because all of us here, we don't care what you are. Come play a D&D game. Come be just a cool guy to hang out with. And I think more queer. It feels weird saying queer, because for me, queer is like not a nice word, but they say it, so I'm going to say it back to them. But if you're a queer player of any RPG, of any war game, of anything, these people don't care about you. You are being used. You are ammunition in a gun being fired at the other side. They don't care. If you step a toe out of line, they will toss you away like Andy does to Woody in the fucking Toy Story. I'm done playing with you. You will find better and more accepting people here with me and Pundit and my chat and this entire group, because except for like 1% of fucking like Bible thumpers, we don't care. All right. Like, as long as you pay your taxes and don't kick a dog, we don't care about what and who you are. My Discord is full of gay people, and there's no problems. But what you guys got to realize, and like take me, like I'm a straight dude. I'm looking at the queer creators win big at the Annie Awards, and I see thirsty sword lesbians. I cannot believe it has merit due to the people who are using you. I cannot say that book made by these lesbians, I assume, must be a good book, because I can't do that, because all your merit has been drained. You've been put on a pedestal as a method of control, and we can't give you guys merit because you're being used. You're being co-opted as a weapon against the non-left, I guess. Is that what we want to call it, Pundit? Like what would you call us exactly? Like the RPG conservatives? Like what is our genre?
I like the term cultural libertarian, but that's just me. Some people might not be quite as enamored with that term, I guess.
At this point, it's kind of true, is it not? Like, hey, leave my shit alone. I just want to play fantasy. Like, this is escapism. This whole genre is escapism.
Yeah.
And
so, in the attacks on the OSR that have been made by the wokeists, they try to claim that, the OSR discriminates against people of color and LGBT and women and so that's complete bullshit, right? Like there's a large number of people in the OSR, including a lot of, OSR designers or YouTubers or things like that are, the most famous Latino game designer, that is to say me,
that Pundit guy
is a figure in the OSR, right? And then you have other Latinos, you've got black OSR gamers, you've got Asians, you've got gay people, bisexuals, everything, right? And there's an interesting kind of thing that happened on the earlier part of this year, because the kind of the woke version, the woke alternative to the OSR, right? That sometimes call themselves OSR, and then suddenly they declare that the OSR is dead and try to change their name, and then they go back to being OSR because that didn't work, right? And they're always constantly trying to like muddy the waters by either pretending they're the OSR or claiming that the OSR is unspeakably evil and that they're the real alternative to it. But anyways, they have they're the ones that constantly make this claim that, you shouldn't even look at stuff like, what the RPG Pundit does, because if you even go there, you're going to be attacked, you're going to be harassed and stuff like that, which is absolute nonsense. But, there's a lot of people that, belong to some minority or another, so to say, and they believe this because they're only listening to what they're saying. And part of what they do is they tell you, if you follow this person on Twitter, we're going to blocklist you, right? So you're going to get banned from all of us, and so you can't even look at what this person is saying on Twitter, right? Whether it's me or other OSR designers. So they don't see what the OSR is really like, but that there are cracks in the armor there too, because we had around the end of last year, there's one of these game designers that was, in trying to get in on game design with this kind of fake woke OSR, is a person named Taylor Lane. And Taylor Lane is queer and agendered, and was involved in that group, and they were not happy with what was going on there, because they realized there's a tiny cabal of people that are like in control of that fake OSR, right? Like some of these people like Diego Noguera and Monkey's Paws and the Morkborg guys. Morkborg is a fake game, it's actually, there's nothing creative about Morkborg, by the way, except that they use like some freaky art and an edgy marketing style, but it does nothing that you can't find in 1,000 other games. So it's really pathetic. But anyway, these people are in control, at a very top-down control of everything that goes on in their version of the OSR. And so if you're trying to make it there, you have to spend a lot of time promoting their products for them. And they will not promote your products. You have to really earn your keep there. And then maybe someday in the future, they'll give you a chance where they'll promote your product, right? So it's like a pyramid scheme. And when Taylor Lane was kind of, asking some questions or making some criticisms of what some of these the ruling party of that movement was doing, they were like pushed back against very, very harshly, And at the same time, out of coincidence, I think more than anything, because at some point, they were tweeting something, and it was in a thread where there were some actual OSR people there. They started seeing what the actual OSR people were saying, and became very confused because they'd been told that the actual OSR, were these horrible gatekeepers and bigots and everything, and it didn't seem that way to them, right? And then they started like kind of looking at what some of these OSR designers like myself were posting, and started answering some of those threads, and found that people like me were saying, oh wow, that's a good point, because there were threads about game design, right? And Taylor was presenting stuff that was very interesting ideas in the context of game design, right? And so at one point they started talking to me, and it was like this really interesting process of like red pilling that I saw with my own eyes as it was happening, that they were suddenly realizing, well, wait a minute. So you guys promote each other? You promote people that haven't started, that aren't already famous and stuff? I'm like, yeah, I do that all the time, right? If I see something I like that someone in the OSR is doing, of course I'm going to promote it. And they're like, oh yeah, but aren't you like focused on just promoting your own stuff?
Hold on. So the thing is, why did you promote it? Out of what?
Well, because I saw what they were doing, and I thought it was something creative and innovative, right?
Well, exactly. So, but you promote it because of the merit. It was merit-based promotion.
And so, basically, Taylor said, well, then screw these guys, right? And has started now, posting and writing for, the real OSR, and was, even though there's always some people that are genuinely kind of bigoted, and there were a lot of people that were kind of suspicious, because when you see someone that is, maybe fits the profile of these protected groups, you like, you might become nervous that, well, that this person must be, it's kind of, that's a problem on our side that we have to watch out for, right? Because if there's somebody that is, I think maybe especially, the so-called LGBT, but also, other minority groups or a woman or whatever, there are some gamers that have just been so traumatized, let's say, by the wokest cancel culture, that they'll become instantly paranoid that these people are going to be like that, right? But for the most part, almost everyone in the OSR was like, yeah, okay, that, what you're talking about here or there or whatever, this product that you've put out is cool, right? And so, Taylor jumped ship and joined the real OSR. And immediately, as soon as she did that, you had these people that were in the fake OSR, people like, what's his name? John Battle, who I call Mr. Potato, and, the press and all of these assholes started attacking them and claiming, making all kinds of ridiculous claims about Taylor. And one of them, John Battle, he put out this hour-long video about how the OSR is controlled by the alt-right, and made like this long video that was broken into several parts, where first they talked about like neo-Nazis, and then about me, and then about Grim Jim, who's another OSR designer, and a little bit about Venture Satanis, who's another OSR designer, and then got to their actual point. And then about Bard Vikernes, right? Like, they just threw him in there, even though nobody in the OSR is connected to Bard Vikernes. His books aren't, his game isn't an OSR game, and he's universally reviled, right? But they had to throw him in there because you throw in a real Nazi into the mix, and it's meant to discredit everybody else by association. And then he got to the real point of his thing, which was Taylor Lane, where he dedicated like 20 fucking minutes to Taylor and explaining that Taylor Lane is actually the most dangerous person now because they're LGBT, right? And yet they're working to support white supremacy or something like that,
I mean, at that point, can I say, hey, show me the receipts? Like, where does book to say whites only? Like, can you just like, okay, sure, cool, show me. Like, if it
doesn't, it's not like that at all.
Well, I know, but if they can't show the receipts, they shouldn't be even bothered with. Like, oh, okay, I'm a racist, cool, show me.
They've never needed to base anything on facts. That's not how it works. Everything about them is narrative, not fact.
Well,
right?
It should. Everything should be fact based. Let's be honest here. One of the things that kills it most of that. There's no fact based information. It's always like, well, I think, and thus it's true.
Well, Ben Shapiro and I both agree with you on that, but the fact is that their tactic is always about creating an invented narrative, a fantasy scenario that they can then use to try to override actual truth, right? But the real lesson of all this is that they were more terrified of Taylor Lane than they were of me or Grim Jim or Venger or anybody else in the OSR, right? Because they know that if in Taylor's case, somebody who's part of, let's say the LGBT spectrum, if someone like that succeeds in the OSR, it destroys that narrative, right? It ruins the whole story that they've invented, that somebody who isn't cisgendered and white and male could succeed in the OSR. If that happens, it ruins their whole narrative that the OSR is only going to promote straight white males.
Well, yeah, it must be quite annoying when the cattle catches wind and thinks for itself. And that's one thing I want to see more queer folk do. Think for yourself. I mean, it's not hard to see. It's all there in the fucking open. Just open your eyes and go, oh, there it is. And you'll catch on pretty fucking quick.
They're so controlling in how they curate what people that they've connected to are allowed to even read, right? Because the reason that Taylor had no idea that they would be much better off as an independent game designer in the real OSR was because they were told you're not allowed to even look at this, right? And Taylor is enough of a contrarian that they looked at it anyways. But a lot of other people are just going to assume, well, these people talk about how much they care about me, and they talk about how horrible these other guys are. So those other guys must be horrible. So I'm not even going to look at that, because it's dangerous. And also, if I follow them on Twitter, I'm going to be banned by the people that actually care about me, And so it's this really crazy level of submission to authority. That unfortunately is a trait among
it's
a
not
lot
even
of people.
real authority. It's self-imposed authority. They don't actually have authority in anything. They're in their own little fucking world where, like, I control the domain, and they import this control on others when they don't actually fucking have it. Like, that's
to a degree, yes. Yeah, that's right. But I mean, when they control so many parts of our culture, in a sense, they do have a kind of soft authority, right? Because everything in the culture is saying these people are right, and people like you and me are wrong, right, and evil. So, we're the counterculture.
No. Not just that. It's the fact that the free thinkers are now the problem children. Like, how dare you think outside the bounds we set for you?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
And
so
it's
the same.
It boggles my mind that now being like rightish is now considered punk and rock and roll and that kind of shit. Like, oh yeah, we're against the fucking establishment. We're like, what happened? What the like, what the fuck?
Yeah, we're the new punk rock, because there's, because you can't, like the, everything that used to be edgy is now something that's been subverted by the people in charge. So the only people that are the actual rebels now are people who are defending tradition rather than the people that are standing up for innovation. But really, ironically, in that process, what that means is that the actually creative people end up creating products within that counter movement of tradition. So like the OSR is both the most traditional movement in RPGs and the most creative movement, right? The best, most innovative games come out of the OSR, but they're all based on the most traditional version of D&D. So
I think my game's kind of cool, but you do you. This guy's gonna play. You just gonna put me like that? What you gonna... The most creative, like, mine's kind of creative. You're gonna be like that, man. Go. I think
there's also a thing about one of the marks of the success of the OSR is that because it's based on traditional D&D. It means the challenge when you're being creative in the OSR is to make a product that is bound within that tradition, like painting inside of the box. Like it's the difference between like this weirdo avant-garde art that's just like splotches on a canvas, or you hang a toilet seat on a wall and you say that's art, which when, anybody who doesn't fall for the hype of that realizes that that's not actually any real talent, right?
Well, saying I tried that and a horny Jason Pollock came out of it. So I tried, I really did. And it went out the fucking window.
But, the real challenge is, can you do something that is like along the lines of Renaissance art, but it's actually different than what was there before, right? So then suddenly you have to draw within the lines, but then find ways to be incredibly creative within those lines, right? So it makes you, the fact that you create this framework that you have to work within forces you to not just be creative in ways that are cheap or shallow. It means that the way that you have to make your game different from everybody else's game, it requires some really interesting creativity.
You mean like having meritorious imagination?
Yeah, sure, exactly.
All right, well, we're actually at 2 hours, that came by quite quickly. I need to try and get Taylor on here. I think it'd be fascinating to have a queer eye for the D&D guy aspect, bringing Taylor in on here and having them tell us about their journey through this shit, because that's another big thing. I'm trying to get like queer D&D players on here, and they won't do it for the obvious fucking reason. But Taylor,
I suspect Taylor Lane might. I'll try to put in a good word.
I mean, I'm not like super popular or huge, but they can still come out and speak their mind in a format. But regardless, but that's 2 hours, boys. We're going to call it here. Mr. Pundit, thank you for coming on and having the balls to come talk to me, because many don't. So you got that going for you at least. Do you have anything coming? Zane, fucking brain hemorrhage. Do you have anything coming up in your sphere of the world you want to talk about before we head out, or no?
I mean, first of all, in case there's anybody watching who wasn't familiar with me before, check me out on YouTube, the RPG Pundit. Right, I do videos where I talk like this about these sorts of things. I noticed earlier in the stream chat that someone said that I sound a bit like Jordan Peterson, and I guess
I saw that. Yeah,
maybe that's because I grew up mostly in Alberta, which is also where Jordan Peterson grew up. And I actually went to the same university that he went to. And he was a few years before me. And then I was there the same time that Ezra Levant of Rebel News was there. The University of Alberta has a lot to answer for in the world, like it produced the three of us. So, so there is that. And also, I studied history and comparative studies, which means that I talk a lot about history and mythology, and that I guess I could sound a little bit like him in terms of content too. But
so Alberta's crimes are known. Gotcha.
Jordan Peterson talking about D&D, check out my YouTube channel, and if you're a gamer and you didn't know about the OSR until now, be sure to check it out. And you can start by checking out my products, like Lion and Dragon and Star Adventurer and the Invisible College, Arrows of Indra. I wrote Arrows of Indra, which is years before. They're bragging in Radiant Citadel that it's like this non-Western setting, basically. Well, Arrows of Indra, I produced that in 2012, and not only is it a setting that's based entirely on Indian mythology, super dedicated. All my products are dedicated to being really historically or mythologically authentic, right? So it's very they're made to be played for sure. They're meant to be very playable. I never sacrifice historical wank for in place of actual playability, but they're really like it's the only place I've made really serious use of my history degree. But it's a setting that's like no white people there. It's all East Indians, and it was actually first RPG to ever have a transgender character on the cover, and wokeists hate that fact. They're just so pissed off about it because obviously in ancient India you had a third gender class, right? And so I mentioned that in the game, and one of the characters on the cover is one of them. So it was not something I did for any kind of woke virtue signaling, because it was a bit early for that anyways, but it turned out to be that way, and it just drives them nuts. But anyways, check out those products, and check out all the OSR products. I've got on my YouTube channel one of my earliest videos, you got to go way back to the start of the channel. There's I got more than 100 videos there, but go down to the beginning and you'll see this video that is called the OSR is avant-garde, and it'll explain to you what's cool about OSR gaming. And if you're not happy with the direction 5th edition is going in, you really want to check out OSR products. And follow me on YouTube, and follow me on Twitter too. I'm Casimir Urbanski there. And I guess that's it.
All right, chat. We'll see you Friday for the War Crime Boys game, and take care. Good night.